Chapter 1. The Storm. The wind howled like a wild beast, tearing through the small coastal village of Seabrook. Waves crashed against the jagged rocks, sending sprays of salty water high into the air. The villagers had long since retreated to their homes, locking their doors and windows against the fury of the storm. But on the edge of the village, perched on a cliff overlooking the raging sea, stood the Seabrook lighthouse. Its beam of light cut through the darkness, a beacon of hope for any ship caught in the storm. Inside the lighthouse, 16-year-old Clara tightened her grip on the railing as she climbed the spiral staircase. Her father, Thomas, the lighthouse keeper, was already at the top, adjusting the lantern to ensure its light remained steady. Clara had grown up in the lighthouse, and she knew every inch of it: the creak of the stairs, the smell of oil and salt, the sound of the waves crashing below. But tonight, something felt different. The storm was fiercer than any she had seen before. "Clara," her father called over the roar of the wind. "Check the windows on the lower level. Make sure they're secure." Clara nodded and hurried back down the stairs. As she moved through the lighthouse, she couldn't shake the feeling of unease that had settled in her chest. She had always loved the lighthouse, but tonight it felt like a prison, isolated and vulnerable to the storm's wrath. Chapter 2. A Cry for Help. As Clara secured the last window, she heard something faint over the sound of the wind, a cry for help. At first, she thought it was her imagination, but it came again, louder this time. She rushed to the door and peered out into the storm. The rain stung her face, and the wind nearly knocked her off her feet, but she could just make out a figure struggling in the water below. "Father!" she screamed, running back up the stairs. "There's someone in the water." Thomas's face paled as he followed Clara to the window. "It's a sailor," he said grimly. "He must have been thrown overboard. We have to help him." "But how?" Clara asked, her voice trembling. "The waves are too strong. We can't reach him from here." Thomas hesitated, his eyes scanning the stormy sea. "We'll use the rescue boat," he said finally. "But it's too dangerous for both of us to go. I'll need you to stay here and keep the light steady." Clara's heart raced. She had never been left alone in the lighthouse during a storm. "What if something happens to you?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Thomas placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're stronger than you think, Clara. You can do this." Chapter 3. The Rescue. Clara watched from the window as her father battled the waves in the small rescue boat. Her hands shook as she adjusted the lantern, keeping its beam focused on the struggling sailor. Minutes felt like hours as she waited, her eyes never leaving the tiny boat. Finally, she saw her father pull the sailor aboard. Relief flooded through her, but it was short-lived. A massive wave rose up, towering over the boat. Clara screamed as the wave crashed down, swallowing the boat and her father. "No!" she cried, her voice lost in the storm. She stared at the spot where the boat had been, hoping against hope that her father would surface. But the sea was merciless, and the boat was gone. Chapter 4. A New Responsibility. Clara sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. Her father was gone, and she was alone. The weight of her loss threatened to crush her, but then she remembered his words, "You're stronger than you think." She wiped her tears and stood up. The lighthouse still needed her. The beam of light was the only thing standing between the ships at sea and disaster. She couldn't let her father's sacrifice be in vain. For the rest of the night, Clara worked tirelessly, keeping the light steady and watching for any sign of her father. But as the storm began to subside and the first light of dawn broke over the horizon, she knew he wasn't coming back. Chapter 5. Moving Forward. In the days that followed, Clara took on the role of lighthouse keeper. The villagers offered to help, but she refused. This was her responsibility now, and she was determined to honor her father's memory by doing the job he had loved so much. At first, it was overwhelming. The lighthouse required constant attention, and Clara had to learn how to maintain the machinery and keep the light burning through the night. But with each passing day, she grew more confident. She found strength she didn't know she had, and she began to see the lighthouse not as a prison, but as a symbol of hope, just as her father had. Chapter 6. A New Beginning. One evening, as Clara was cleaning the lantern, she heard a knock at the door. She opened it to find a young man standing there, his face familiar but weathered by the sea. "Clara?" he asked hesitantly. She recognized him immediately. It was the sailor her father had rescued. "You're alive," she whispered, her voice filled with disbelief. The sailor nodded. "Thanks to your father. I wanted to come and thank you both. I heard about what happened. I'm so sorry." Clara felt a lump in her throat, but she managed a small smile. "He would have been glad to know you made it." The sailor stayed for a while, sharing stories of his travels and the people he had met. As they talked, Clara realized that her father's legacy lived on, not just in the lighthouse, but in the lives he had touched. Chapter 7. The Legacy of Light. Years passed, and Clara became known as the lighthouse keeper's daughter. She continued to tend the lighthouse, guiding ships safely to shore and inspiring the villagers with her strength and determination. She never married, but she didn't feel alone. The lighthouse was her home, and the sea was her companion. One stormy night, much like the one that had taken her father, Clara stood at the top of the lighthouse, watching the beam of light cut through the darkness. She thought of her father and all he had taught her, about courage, responsibility, and the power of hope. As the storm raged on, Clara whispered to the wind, "I'm still here, Father. And I'll keep the light burning, no matter what." And with that, she turned back to her work, a beacon of strength in the face of life's storms. Moral of the story. Clara's story teaches us that even in our darkest moments, we can find the strength to carry on. Life is full of storms, but like the lighthouse, we can stand tall and shine a light for others. No matter how difficult the journey, we are stronger than we think, and our actions can inspire hope in those around us.